Hello and welcome to BYJU'S Exam Prep IAS. Welcome to the big news. The topic for today's discussion: BBC documentary blocked under IT rules. Let us try and understand what is this topic in greater detail. We have the British Broadcasting Corporation, which happens to be a British public service broadcaster. Its main responsibility is to provide impartial public service broadcasting. It was established by a royal charter in 1927. The royal charter is the constitutional basis for the BBC. The BBC's mission, as outlined in the charter, is to act in public interest, serving all audience through the provision of impartial, high quality and distinctive output and services which inform, educate and entertain. The British Broadcasting Corporation has now released a documentary, and the Indian government has ordered YouTube and Twitter to take down videos and tweets about this BBC documentary, primarily because it is critical of the Prime Minister of India. So directions have been issued by the Ministry of Information and Broadcasting using emergency power under the IT rules of 2021. So both YouTube as well as Twitter have complied with these directions. Now the question is, what are these emergency powers? When we look into the emergency powers, we have the rules that is drafted by the Government of India called as the Information Technology Intermediary Guidelines and Digital Media Ethics Code Rules of 2021. According to it, we have one of the sections called as Section 16, that is Rule 16, blocking of information in case of an emergency. Look at clause 2. It goes on to say, in case of an emergency, the Secretary, that is the Ministry of Information and Broadcasting, may, if he is satisfied that it is necessary or expedient and justifiable for blocking for public access of any information or part thereof through any computer resource after recording reasons in writing as an interim measure, issue such directions as he may consider necessary to such identified or identifiable persons, publishers, intermediary in control of such computer resource, hosting such information or part thereof without giving him an opportunity of hearing. So basically, we have the Secretary of Ministry of Broadcasting who has been given the power. Let's say there is one of the information which is emanating from the computer source. If this information is going to threaten the sovereignty or the integrity of the country, or it is going to violate the public order, it is going to violate the national security in that particular case on the specified grounds, in writing, the Secretary for the Ministry of Broadcasting would be able to issue this rule, impose this emergency rule, so that all the intermediaries, who are the intermediaries? It can be Twitter, it can be Facebook, it can be YouTube. So these intermediaries will have to follow the rule and ultimately prevent the spread of this information. So what are we looking at? We are looking at Information Technology, Intermediary Guidelines and Digital Media Ethics Code Rules of 2021. What are we looking at? We are looking at Section 16 of this particular rule. So according to it, we have the Secretary who has the powers to impose restrictions such that this particular information is not transferred from one computer source to another computer source. What has the government said about this particular documentary? The Ministry of Information and Broadcasting has rejected the documentary produced by BBC as a propaganda piece that lacks objectivity and reflects a colonial mindset. Senior officials of ministries, including Ministry of External Affairs, Home and Intelligence Bureau, have examined the documentary and found it to be an attempt to cast aspersions on the authority and credibility of the Supreme Court of India, sow divisions among various Indian communities, and make unsubstantiated allegations regarding actions of the foreign governments in India. So according to the government sources, they go on to feel that this may undermine the sovereignty and integrity of India, have the potential to adversely impact India's friendly relationship with a foreign country, and also disturb peace and tranquility and public order within the country. And as a result, they feel that this particular documentary should not be spread. The information should not be transferred within YouTube as well as on Twitter. And the most important factor that we have to understand from the polity point of view is with respect to the delegated legislation. Let us try and understand what is this concept of delegated legislation. legislation. We have the parliament which makes the laws. But does the parliament have so much of time that it can discuss about every single issue? No. The parliament does not have the time. There is paucity of time. So the first important factor why parliament would not be able to make most of the rules is because they have the paucity of time. So time is a major constraint. The second happens to be the expertise. So when it comes to the laws are made by the parliament, but when it comes to the rules, these rules are made by the executive agencies. So what we have is many acts are passed by the parliament, but the rules are delegated to the executive. It is delegated to the government. It is delegated to the regulatory bodies as well. So remember, when it comes to the IT Act, we have one of the important section which is 87. It says power of the central government to make the rules. The central government may by notification in the official gazette and in the electronic gazette make rules to carry out the provisions of this act. It is under this particular law. So we have a primary law in the form of the IT Act of 2000. So under the primary law, the skeletal structure is given by the IT Act. So under the skeletal structure, we have the rules that are drafted, and that is in the form of information technology intermediary guidelines rules of 2011 and 21. So we have the skeletal structure in the form of law, which is passed by the parliament. The flesh, the muscle is added by the rules, and these rules are given permission and they can be drafted by the government as well as by the executive agencies. So remember, the major idea that we are trying to extract from this particular topic is about law and rule. When it comes to the law, it has to be drafted by the parliament, but when it comes to the rules, this power has been delegated to the government and to the executive. So it is the executive which make these rules. So remember, when it comes to these rules, because they have to be changed frequently, that is why this power is given to the executive. So the executive are the ones who implement the laws, so they know what are the exigencies that may come. So in order to make sure that they would be able to change whenever they wish to, frequent intervals of time, which is why these rules are also flexible in nature. But also note, parliament also retains the power to examine all these rules as well, and at the same time any member of the parliament may demand a discussion on these rules as well. These rules cannot violate the main skeletal structure that has been given by the parliament. So whatever rules are drafted by the government and the executive will have to be within the ambit of the law, and this particular rule cannot overtake or superimpose itself with respect to the law as well. And when it comes to the parliament, what we have is one of the committees called as the Committee on Subordinate Legislation. It is this Committee on Subordinate Legislation which will also look into the rules as well. Let me give you some of the statistics. Out of 1515 rules, regulations, circulars and schemes laid before the Lok Sabha between 2008 and 2010, the committee has examined only 44 documents, which basically means most of the rules that are done by the government and the executive are not examined by the Committee on Subordinate Legislation. In fact, the Committee on Subordinate Legislation has to examine regulations, rules, sub rules, bylaws, so on and so forth. But again, they are not able to look into it. This basically means out of all the documents that were given from 2008 and 2010, only 3% of the documents were reviewed by the Committee on Subordinate Legislation. So in order to overcome such concerns, the Parliament will have to make sure that more research staff are appointed to this particular Committee on Subordinate Legislation, so that they are able to research and come up with the right analysis for such rules within the ambit of the law. It is this that we have to understand with respect to this topic. So this is it for today. Thank you for watching. All the best.